was on 50 podcasts for my first book, Survive and Thrive. And I was a little disappointed by how little those podcasts seem to move book sales.
And they've heard you on an interview. You've piqued their interest. You've given them some real curiosity, and they are asking this question. I wonder if this would work for me. But if the only thing they can do to answer that question is go read a whole book, you're going to lose most people because the consumption tax is so high.
He opens his phone, he pulls out Amazon, looks it up, buys it in front of me, puts his phone back in his pocket and said, okay, so you're like a sales expert, right? Can I get your advice? This is somebody who's already running a multi-million-dollar business. He started asking me a couple questions, and then he said,
the primary goal today is for me to coach John through a podcast guesting strategy to support his goals for this book launch. So, John, welcome back. It's great to have you here. I think as a way to launch into this and get right into the meat, I know you've written several books before, and what we're going to be referring to as an authority book. I'd love to hear a little bit of your experience with that, what you've learned, and we can kind of use that as our initial context as we think about what you might want to do differently or what we might want to leverage that's worked in the past as you go to launch Sold Out Coach.
Sure, happy to. Thank you for having me back, Dustin. Glad to be back. This is my fourth book, which is kind of weird to say, like, because I feel like there's still a lot to learn about this process. In some ways, I feel like this should be my 12th book, or it should be my first book. I don't know, but it's my fourth, right? So I published 3 books before now. And so each of the books has been relatively successful. Each of those has been #1 bestsellers multiple times, and in their categories on Amazon. Each of those books has led to, thousands of book sales and hundreds of clients, which is really honestly a big part of this, is like actually creating clients from that. And I learned when I published my first book that the phrase, I am an author, is a life sentence. That once you say that, it completely changed how people perceive you, allows you to sort of skip the line in terms of credibility in your industry. And so that's something I've kept with me, and I'll always keep with me, right? Like I am an author, and and dare I even say a best-selling author.
That's right.
I used to always say I was the author of the best-selling books, and I would like list the titles. But then last year around Black Friday, I got to a point where all 3 of my books were #1 bestsellers at the same time. And I was like, okay, I think at this point we can say it's probably the author who may be the common theme here. And then I started saying best-selling author.
Yeah, you got to take on that identity. So with this book, I think just so the readers know like what this is about before we get into the specific strategy around marketing it, like tell us a little bit more about Sold Out Coach. What's the problem it seeks to solve, and who's the ideal reader for this book? And then we'll get more into your goals for the book. But I'd love to talk about what this book is so that people can start to put that cap on when they think about how to apply these strategies to their own endeavors.
Yeah, so this book is called Sold Out Coach, exactly how to earn $10,000 or more per month, group coaching 90 minutes per week. And it's my full playbook that I already teach inside of my group coaching program, Sold Out Coach Club. So it's kind of meta because it's a book about how to sell group coaching based on my own group coaching program. And then my hope is also to use the book to sell my group coaching program, right? So there's like a lot of things going on there. The book is called Sold Out Coach. My program is called Sold Out Coach Club, right? So there's natural affinity there. It's definitely the book that's the closest related to my offer. My last book, Serve to Sell, is exactly how to sell premium programs with one free coaching call, which has done great for creating clients for me. But that book is basically me double clicking on one of the tactics I teach in my group coaching program and then turning that into a book, which has been great. There's been lots of reasons why I could say that book, I'm going to say as an example, that book definitely did better for me commercially than either of my other books before it, in part because I think 2 things. One is right out of the bat, the title communicates my authority, right? So that we talk about this in the Authority Guild, like the authority byline test of if you say like, I am John Meese, author of, try the title without the subtitle and see, does it do anything for you? My first book was called Survive and Thrive. John Meese, author of Survive and Thrive, does not tell you anything about what I am actually the expert of. And I used to joke, I used to say, it sounds like it should probably be like a wilderness survival book. And now there actually is a new wilderness survival book that's called Survive and Thrive that is now more popular than my business book, Survive and Thrive.
Go figure.
So, yeah, go figure. But with Serve to Sell, it immediately tells you a couple things right out of the bat. You're like, oh, this guy is an authority on something related to sales or selling. And he's leading with Serve to Sell, which is a little bit of a paradox that makes you go, oh, I'm interested about that. I want to know, how do I have a service-based or, approach to selling? Even on the cover, there's a $sign. For anybody watching on the video, if you're not watching the video, you just have to imagine this, or go to Amazon and look at it. But there's a heart and there's a $sign on the cover, so it's meant to kind of communicate this tension right off the bat. So that's great. I mean, that book, it's a short, useful book. People love it. People recommend it. And actually, one thing I think that is unique about that book that I don't have here is that it's a very flexible. It's like basically I'm giving people a tool they can take into a lot of different situations.
Yep.
So, for example, right after that book came out, I got a chance to go in and so Donald Miller's book, Coach Builder, had just come out, and I got invited by our mutual friend, Macy Robinson, to go into the story brand community and to teach the serve to sell method. I don't think they're going to want me to teach the sold out coach method.
Yes.
Because they have a book called Coach Builder that's also, I think, read, actually, now that I think about it. And anyways, it's close enough that it's confusing, right? Versus me coming in and teaching a sales technique that opened up all kinds of partnership opportunities where people could have me in and teach that, and it helped their bigger framework. This book's my whole framework, right? And so, I mean, I'm happy to teach this. Don, if you're listening, I'm happy to teach this in the story community.
He listens regularly. He'll probably take you up on that.
But I just, I don't know. I have my doubts. So my other two books, my first two books were more of a leak to the product. Serve to Sell was sort of hey, this one tool, and you go, I want the whole toolbox, right? Now I'm selling the whole toolbox. That's kind of where we're at.
That's good. And I like that context because before we can talk about how to market your book, an important premise is that you have a book that's marketable and you have a book that is aligned with your goals for your business, right? And that's why I'm working with John on my own book, because what precedes the launch and the marketing and all the things we're about to get into as a strategy is the book itself. What's the promise of the book? Obviously, the title and subtitle are a huge part of that. And you already started to allude to how you position a book opens or closes certain doors, right? So some books will be super niche or niche, right? And they will maybe open more doors from that standpoint, but they maybe aren't positioning you as the deeper authority for the type of transformation you can actually provide, which I know is a big part of what Sold Out Coach is. It's your full framework, and it's the full holistic approach to creating these sold out coaching programs, which is really what you're known for, more so than the sales technique that is part of that, right? So I think that's a really good primer. And so why don't we talk about, as we start to get into the strategy for this book, your goals for the book, right? Anytime I walk through strategy of any type, including for a book launch with podcast guesting, we always want to begin with the end in mind, right? Before we start talking about how many podcasts or which podcast or what stories do I tell, all of that needs to be aligned toward the outcome that you actually want to drive. And so you and I are both believers in this idea that useful books are the thing that we want to create. And useful books mean people want to read them, they do read them, and they spread by word of mouth. So I think, that's important to kind of say out loud. But when you think about all the blood, sweat, and tears you put into creating this book, and all the time that's ahead of you, and all the work you're going to do with podcast guesting and other ways to spread it, what's it going to do for you? And what does it need to do for you to say, yeah, this marketing strategy is really worth it and really feels aligned and something you can really get behind?
Yeah. It's interesting. When you started to ask that question, I immediately started going to like the official goals in terms of like, we can talk about like book sales and, how when that turns into clients, that kind of stuff. But what actually surprised me, which is that, every year I have at least 2 or 3 people that I talk to that tell me, I really wish I found your framework 3 years ago. That they say, I hear this at least a half dozen times a year of someone saying, I have wasted so much time and so much money trying to build my business online. And I've been so frustrated. And now I see that your path is simple and it works to, launch a single group coaching program that pays you at least $10,000 per month, group coaching 90 minutes per week. So you can buy back your time so that you can then go have time to create books or courses or memberships without the pressure of getting cash out of the gate. And there's so many people who told me, they're like, I wish I found this before. They're like, but I've already wasted so much time, so much money on these other strategies that just didn't work. They just didn't pay off. Sometimes in that case, I'm able to kind of rescue the person almost like a wounded dog and kind of bring them in and like say like, come on, we got you, But honestly, a lot of times I can. A lot of times people are like, all right, let's try it. But they're kind of already lost their spirit or they've lost their cash flow. And then I've just seen so many people give up. People with genuine wisdom, people with genuine knowledge and experience who get so frustrated on the online business model that they give up on their online business. And we're all left we're all left poorer because because the reality is my whole life mission is to help steward wisdom, to collect, protect, and multiply knowledge and experience. And I think that having a sold out group coaching program is it's the best way to bring people into that space of saying, hey, you've already got experience. You trying to figure out how to grow that online. Well, my life was forever changed by a carpenter's son 2,000 years ago who started a sold out group coaching program where he said, he had unlimited resources. And there were a lot of people who said you should be loud and powerful and you should be you should be the Grant Cardone of the synagogue is what they said. I think that's what they said. And then he said, no, I'm good. And for the next 3 years, he ran a sold out group coaching program with just 12 members who paid the highest price possible. And he changed the world forever. And so whatever you think of Jesus Christ, I know Dustin, you and I have a pretty high opinion of him, but even if anyone listens who doesn't, you gotta acknowledge the fact that is an established authority, right? And his business was built off of an occasional Sermon on the Mount, not a Sermon on the Mount on Facebook Live every day,
yes.
Right? So I just think the reality is there's so many reasons why having a sold out group coaching program is good. Yes, it's good. You'll make money doing it. And that's the focus of the book is teaching how to do that. But also in the book, I teach you how this is the way you change the world. It's honestly impacting people in these small group settings. Dustin, I know you and I have both seen that with our own programs, the programs we've been in. And so I just get really excited about saying the very nature of me having a sold out group coaching program is there is a firm limit on how many clients I can personally work with every year. And I actually just lowered rather than raised that limit this year. So because of that, I'm well, but the idea still needs to get out there to more people. So yes, I have commercial goals attached to the book, but the bigger idea is that I just want this to change the landscape in terms of making it a lot easier for really smart professionals to build sold out group coaching programs. They can make the world a healthier, wealthier, and happier place.
Yeah. So the big transformation here is to empower really smart people, coaches, people with wisdom, lived experience, to be able to package that up and sell it profitably in a way that allows them to actually share that gift with the world without taking away from their own family values and other priorities, right? Hence the in 90 minutes a week as part of the subtitle. So I think we've really established your passion for group coaching and why this is the way and why this is what you're called to teach. So let's talk about the book itself, though, as a tool, because you're already doing that. You already have sold out group coaching programs. You haven't yet released this book. So why this book? What is the ends that this book is the means toward, right? Let's talk specifically about what is the job to be done of Sold Out Coach, the book, in this bigger vision that you have. And then we can get a lot more practical about, okay, how do we actually get the book in front of the right people to accomplish those goals?
Yeah, I do expect that one of the rules that we apply to the Authority Guild that I've applied to this book is that it does need to be 100% DIY useful. And so my goal is that 100% of readers, when they read the book, we've already passed this test, run it through, where they can read the book, apply it, and they can have a sold out group coaching program. But I expect that maybe 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 people who read the book are going to say, actually, I want help to apply this. And then they're going to come over and join Sold Out Coach Club to get help from me and my team to actually apply the Sold Out Coach playbook to launch their own Sold Out Coaching program to earn $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000, et cetera, a month from group coaching. And so that's the commercial goal behind it. And I would say is to honestly get high quality leads to get my bullseye target client, which is smart professionals with decades of experience in their industry that have already started to build an online business. So they've attempted to build an email list, sell a course. They're not going. It's not a cold start or a dry start from zero. But they're also what I would call an emerging authority, right? So not somebody who, I'm not as focused on people who already have, multiple 6-figure or 7-figure businesses. In this stage of my career, I'm not as focused on them and saying, you know what, actually, those are the people who are coming from careers where they probably earn 6 figures as a professional, as a full-time professional or with one-on-one clients. And they're trying to figure out how to scale beyond that. And the best way to go from one-on-one to one-to-many is through one-to-few. And so that's my target client. Are someone they're emerging authority is how I describe them.
Yeah. And so what I heard in there is one of the ways you'll know you've won with this book is more leads, more qualified leads of your ideal client profile signing up for Sold Out Coach Club, which is your premium flagship program. And that's a really important contrast because I think a lot of people, maybe when they downloaded this episode and they started listening, they're like, oh, this is one of those episodes where we talk about a quote unquote book launch, meaning we got to sell 10,000 copies in the first week, hit the New York Times bestseller.
Yes.
That is a model. And I think, unfortunately, that's the model that we mostly see on social media, and that's the one that gets the attention, right? That's not the model that actually meets your goals, and it's not the model
No.
that, which is good, because it's not the model I was going to get into as we get into the actual strategy for launching your book successfully, which is we're still going to have a launch and we're still going to get some initial attention, right? But it's really about finding the right readers and partners to find more readers, so that you can get a significant portion of those folks to ultimately enroll in your program. Like, so, and you said you had some numbers, some metrics, some things in mind already. So whatever is already top of mind for you, I'd love to hear that. Like, when you think of, let's say, the first year with Sold Out Coach and it's out in the wild, and we get to maybe a recap episode a year from now, and we say it worked, it met John's desired goals, what would have happened for that, for you to be able to say that with full integrity?
Yeah. Well, so, okay. So the bigger goal is definitely, I'd love for this book to sell 10,000 copies, over the next but that's over the next 2 years, really.
Yep.
So if it sells 10,000 copies over 2 years, not in a week, I'm happy, because that means, as long as those are going to real readers, which is the plan, right? So I got to back up for a second. So I know Dustin, you know Dustin, so I kind of like skip some of this stuff, but, in the industry, there are these stats that we've learned, from a good friend, Tim Grawl, but also some of this comes from like some studies that have been done on the industry to say, like, hey, when you're trying to sell a book that you want to have a lasting impact, the answer is not go after the New York Times bestseller list. The New York Times bestseller list is historically, there's all kinds of problems with it. It's political, it's opinionated. It's not just based on sales numbers, it's based on whether they like your book. But also, half the books that hit the New York Times bestseller list never sell as many copies again as they did during that first week. Yep. It's a vanity metric. It's the ultimate vanity metric.
The ultimate vanity metric. Yes. I want to make sure I want to let you wrap on this a little bit, because you're the publishing expert. And again, really important context for the strategy, because your goals are not to be a flash in the pan, hit one list for 1 week just to be able to put a credibility marker behind it. It's sustained growth over time, which I know you're going to get into how that actually looks for a authority-based book, which is the type of book you and I are writing.
Yeah. Yeah. So in my case, in every case, with like all of our members, so now I'm your publisher, in addition to like helping coaching you through, and because now the Authority Guild's become a publisher beyond just me, and with other members of our mastermind, all publishing together, and we're all committed to the same goals, which is really to say, hey, if we can sell 1,000 copies, and my goal is to sell 1,000 copies in the first 90 days of this book. I will say that's like an actual goal we have for this quarter, is to sell 1,000 copies of this book. If we do that, that dramatically changes the business. Every time I've sold 1,000 copies of a book, those first 1,000, as long as they're going to like actual, and people who are even close to my multi-target client, that's going to create a couple hundred clients out of that. And so that's been my experience every time. I'm excited about that. Forgive me, that math I just said doesn't make sense. That's too high. Not a couple of hundred clients. It's created hundreds of thousands of dollars in clients, but realistically, it's probably more like maybe 1 in 50 books turns into a client typically for me.
Yeah, so maybe
but I always earn at least
1,000 books.
Yeah, so I always earn on average, whenever I've gone back and done it, I've always earned at least $100 per book sale. The way that I've run my book launches, because I'm not focused on those big flash in the pan vanity metrics. I just heard from an author another member of the Authority Guild forwarded me an email from a friend of theirs who was just looking back at their book launch and realizing, hey, all those campaigns I paid for that got all these book sales, the bulk sales for my book to be sitting in a warehouse somewhere, no one's read it. There's a lot of these campaigns where you can get people to like buy your books to cheat the system. No, we're talking about getting the actual humans. So when I did the pre-order campaign for this book, I did a test. I was like, okay, out of 100 books, let's do a pre-order campaign. Let's sell 100 pre-order copies before it was live on Amazon. And of those 100, 2 of those became clients in Sold Out Coach Club and paid $10,000 to join. And I was like, okay, good. That's 1 in 50. Even if that number changes a little bit, that's a really good ratio. Like, I'm excited about that. Even if it gets closer to 1 in 75, even 1 in 100, I'm happy. So it's more like 20 clients out of 1,000 book sales, but still my clients pay me $10,000. So like that's a good book launch, right? If I do that in 90 days. But the bigger goal then is if I can do 10,000 copies in 2 years, then that means the book, just by word of mouth alone, it has a 1 in 8 chance of selling 100,000 copies in 5 years. And then if, again, by word of mouth alone, if I can sell 100,000 copies in 5 years, I have a 1 in 4 chance of selling 1 million copies in 10 years, right? So those are like, that's a long time frame we're talking about. And so we don't have to sell 1 million copies, next week. But like a useful book that people recommend to each other, that's the kind of life that I would hope for it. And so I'm going to do my part to see the first 1,000 copies and then push to the first 10,000 copies. Because that's really when word of mouth starts to take off like crazy. Assuming it's a good book, but it is. I spent a lot of time with it. So
That's good. I want to recap those numbers because I think that is probably the ultimate context for the strategy. So 1,000 copies in 90 days, which gives us the best chance to sell 10,000 in the first 2 years, right? And then 10,000 in the first 2 years gives us the best chance, which is still like 1 in 8, but it's the best chance to sell 100,000 copies, kind of in a 5 years, and then that's the path to 1 million, right? Because ultimately we can't control selling 1 million copies or even selling 100,000 copies. What we can mostly control is those first 1,000 readers with our marketing strategies over the first 2 years, and we're going to focus a lot on the first year of that, and even in this first 90 days. And you threw out $100 per book, and so just kind of break that down. 1,000 copies. If 1 in 100 people ended up enrolling in your program, that would be 10 clients. You're saying like 20 has actually been more like your average, right? So let's call 20 clients $200,000. 1,000 copies equals $200,000 in coaching sales, which is about $200 per book, right? But that's the range we're talking about when we say $100 to $200 per book. And that's a really important distinction because the actual money you make from selling the book might be like $7, right? But we're talking about $100 to $200 because of the positioning of the book, the purpose of the book, and who we're actually putting it in front of, which is a completely different goal set than hitting a list and just trying to have bulk numbers sitting in a warehouse to hit an artificial number that is largely, the income from that's largely driven from royalties. This is not a royalty play. It's a seeding play to get it into the right people's hands to be readers, evangelists, to share it and to get to those bigger numbers so that 1 to 2% of them can become your flagship clients and pay you handsomely for personal access and the ability to work with you to accomplish the goals in the book. And the book itself allows them to do it on their own should they choose that path as well, right? These are all true statements happening at once.
Yes, and I want to emphasize that that's also why the DIY useful thing is so important. Not just because it's a good practice as like a human being to write a book that's actually useful. I mean, I think that's a given, but also that's what allows you to get the word of mouth. Because if somebody reads a book and they're like, "Hey, this book is pretty good, but I think you actually have to hire the coach to get the actual like meat of it," like they're not going to recommend it to anyone.
Yes,
right. So it has to be useful so that they recommend it to the next person who becomes your client. And whereas with my last books, I was averaging more like over $100 a book sale. I think that's where this book is very different because it's so targeted. It's like, if you have no desire to create a sold out group coaching program, you're not going to pick up this book.
Yeah.
Right. Like, or maybe you're going to buy it, but you're not going to read it. And so it's much more aligned with my program versus Serve to Sell was close. Always Be Teaching. That was a leap. That was like, Always Be Teaching was like, hey, if you want to do stuff on the internet that like grows your audience and like, then you should have a sold out group coaching program. Like there's a pretty big leap there that you have to make, and it still worked.
Yep. So sort of the prescribed path, and we're going to talk about the different ways that you can still get to the end goal, even if people don't directly follow this path. But sort of the path we're designing for, the typical path would be podcast listener becomes a book buyer and reader. That reader becomes a believer in you and your method, and they start to believe for themselves that this is something that's possible for them, which makes them a qualified lead. And then as a qualified lead, then they can become a sold out coach prospect and buyer, right? Like that would be, if everyone checked every box along the journey, that would be the journey that we're really designing for here. But you and I have talked a lot about the fact that part of the power of a well-designed book and a well-designed marketing strategy is people can shortcut that process, and people can actually become a client without even buying the book, right? And people can become an evangelist for the book, even if they don't become a client of yours. And so that's, to me, where this gets really exciting, and it gets more into an exponential growth. There's this linear path that we want people to follow in most cases, and it's kind of the prescribed path. So listener to reader to believer to lead to client. But talk about, based on your own experience and your desires for this book in particular, like what are some of the other outlier things that will very likely happen as a result of having this book as a tool in your toolbox for marketing?
Yeah, I think the story that comes to mind that is where I really learned this was when I met Ali Abdaal. And so, which, it may, if whether you know him or not, he's a huge productivity vlogger, and he's got a wonderful, amazing business. And we were both speaking at the same event. And so we had this moment where backstage where it was just the two of us. And I know who he is. He has no idea who I am. And that's fine. Like my ego is not bothered by that. I mean, he now knows who I am. But at the time, we're just chatting real quickly, and I complimented on something he did recently online. I was like, "Hey, I love that video." And he's like, "Oh, great." He's like, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm an author." And he's like, "No way. What's your book?" I said, "Well, my new book, Surf to Sell, just came out." So he opens his phone, does not throw it. Sorry. He opens his phone. He pulls out Amazon, looks it up, and he says, "This one?" I say, "Yeah." In front of me, buys it, puts his phone back in his pocket, and said, "Okay, so you're like a sales expert, right? Can I get your advice?" So that moment, I was like, there was part of me that was like, "But you haven't read the book yet." There was the sort of creator in me kind of like cringe a little bit. I was like, "No, but you haven't read the book."
This book. Yeah.
yeah. But the book did the job. I don't think he ever read the book, right? Like he bought it, but I don't think he ever read it. What he did was he started asking me a couple questions, and then he said, "Do you have 10 minutes?" And he jumped on a Zoom call with his team that was literally like in a different time zone across the ocean. And we like redesigned their entire group coaching sales strategy, like in that room on that call right after we met. Right. And so this is somebody who's already running a multi-million-dollar business who recognized that I had an authority on something that he needed help with because of the book title, literally just because of the book title. That was it. So up until then, I thought it's a neat funnel. It's a neat, tidy funnel. You sell the book, people read the book, they get to the end of the book. At the end of the book, they fill out the lead magnet, and then you meet with them and then they become a client. It does sometimes happen that way, but very rarely. I think more often what happens is the book becomes a good conversation starter. So I've had this happen on podcasts where somebody's inviting me to come on and talk about the book. We're talking about the book. The book is just really an excuse for us to have the conversation. And then sometimes people reach out and become a client, never having bought the book. So I do expect that and want that with this, with my podcast approach with this book. That's also why I want to talk through call to action with you. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of stuff about podcasting, but with my other books, when I did a book tour, it was always just like, "Hey, go to buy the book. Either go to the book website or go." And every author does this. They say, "Go buy your book. Go buy the book wherever books are sold, or pull out Amazon." But I've always wondered, I'm like, okay, if you're listening to a podcast, and let's just say you're going for a walk or you're exercising or working out, like what are the odds you're going to stop whatever you're doing and pull out your phone, go to Amazon, buy a book, and then actually read it a week or two later? I think those would be small. I mean, I'm just making a guess here, but I think those odds are pretty low. So I was on 50 podcasts for my first book, Survive and Thrive. And I was a little disappointed by how little those podcasts seemed to move book sales.
Yep.
But I think part of the problem was actually that I was trying to use the podcast to move book sales. Mm-hmm. And so I'm happy to sell this book. I want to sell this book, but I actually have a hunch there's a better use of the podcast conversations that come out of the book. What do you think, Dustin?
Yeah, that's why we're here. So, and as a footnote, that was Survive and Thrive was before John and I had worked together in the work that I do, and so I want to highlight a couple things here, and then we're gonna. I promise we're getting right into the strategy next and talk about this call to action. That's the next thing I want to talk about when you're on podcast. But to kind of close the loop on all the jobs to be done for this book and all the ways that it will benefit your business on podcasts and outside of that. So there's the traditional funnel path, book to lead to sale. There's the Ali Abdaal experience, which is simply being the author of this book provides the authority that some people will just say, "Oh, you must be an expert. I need to hire you." And they don't even need to consume the book to do that. 3, which you started to allude to there, is it opens up stages because it exists, right? Like when you and I were at Craft and Commerce, you had the closing or the opening keynote at Craft and Commerce. I think a big part of the timing of that and why that works so well is you just released Serve to Sell. In fact, you launched it at Craft and Commerce. No one in that audience had read that book because it didn't exist until you were on the stage or hadn't been released yet. And so that's a great example of just having the book with a clear promise and a clear ideal audience created a stage opportunity, which is one of the reasons why podcast guesting is going to be so available to you as you're releasing Sold Out Coach, because the book is, in many cases, an excuse to interview you and to be able to unpack your expertise in that. And it's something I think we'll talk about at the tail end of the interview is partnerships, right? The idea that there's the listeners of a podcast, and we obviously want as many of them to become readers or direct clients or invite you onto their stages as possible. But there's so much opportunity there for partnerships where it's a ripple effect or a flywheel effect, where as you have more exposure to the book and you're out there talking about it, other centers of influence say, I want to highlight John on my platform, or I want to bring his expertise onto my podcast, YouTube channel, physical stage, virtual summit, you name it, newsletter. And so there's these really cool compounding effects that we need to seed with our podcast guesting strategy, right? So does that kind of capture a lot of the value that the book creates outside of direct listeners buying it and becoming the traditional funnel route?
Yes, the book is an asset that amplifies a lot of things, right? In terms of, like you said, it opens those doors. I saw that with Serve to Sell. I mean, it's the same with all my books, but Serve to Sell was the one that, like I mentioned earlier, getting to speak to the story brand community. But also, there's a handful of different group coaching programs, including yours, that started actually putting Serve to Sell in the welcome box.
Yeah,
which is something I didn't expect.
And give it to all of our new clients.
Yeah, which I'm so honored. Thank you for doing that. But you're not the only one. There's actually a few different communities that do this, and I think that's. I mean, I can't think of a better embedded partnership, right? Dustin, I couldn't go to you and I couldn't say, hey, would you put my business card in the welcome box for all of your new clients? So all of your clients who are paying you $10,000 get my business card. There's no way. No. There's no way you could do that. But if I'm like, hey, you want to put my book? I mean, it wasn't even I think it was your idea, right? You're like, and so it's you're like, hey, can I put your business card in my box? And I'm like, yes, you may. And so there's lots of reasons why a book becomes really useful.
Yes. So, okay. So we've, I think, pretty discreetly defined what success for the book from a marketing standpoint looks like. And so let's start to work back from there. All right. So we're going to work back. So getting the ultimate result, which is group coaching clients, is sort of the North Star that we're working from. And so the step that immediately precedes that, and we're from here forth, we're just going to talk about podcast guesting. So when you're on a podcast, the step that precedes anyone to being able to do that ultimate goal, which is hire you and become a client, is the call to action at the end of each interview, right? And we're going to work back into what should the interview be about, and then who should you be interviewed by, and what are the numbers that are going to make this a success for you. But yeah, let's dive into this call to action. This is something you and I have talked about. We actually did a session together for my mastermind recently about this really key moment in a customer journey. So as you're sitting here, just pre-release of this book, what are you thinking would be an effective call to action at the end of an interview, after you've talked about the problem you solve and what the book is about and how you're an authority, that critical moment where you're inviting people to take the next step at the end of the interview? What do you think? And we can certainly talk about some different options and strategies here, but what do you think would be a really good call to action based on maybe your experience from previous books and things that you've learned in your own journey working with other authors?
I think it's the sold out quiz. And this is something that's come out of conversations in your mastermind, your community. I was wrestling through this going, I will say with Serve to Sell, almost every podcast I was on, what I did was I gave away a free copy of the book, like an ebook. And that did work pretty well. I had hundreds, I think maybe last I checked, it was maybe 500 or 600 leads who did that and downloaded that. Many of those became clients. Plenty of other people, though, listened to the podcast, even told me an email, wow, that was so helpful and so useful. And I was looking back and I was like, oh, they didn't actually download the ebook, right? And this was coming up over and over again. And then I thought about it. And I was like, okay, I think the free ebook thing was a cool idea, but I also think there's a lot of reasons why it didn't work, right? If you're not an ebook reader, I mean, I just met with a guy last week. He told me, he zoomed out his camera and showed me these hundreds of books on a shelf. And he's like, I don't do ebooks. So it's like, if you're not an ebook reader, you're not going to download the free ebook. If you're not in a good place.
As a sidebar there, I am an ebook reader, but unless it's already synced into my Kindle, I'm not going to take the time to figure out how to do a Mobi file and get, all this stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
Seamless. And so I think that's similar to just a paperback or hardback reader. You're missing a big part of the market and how they want to consume a book, even if they did want to consume the book. But I know you're getting into maybe why consuming a whole book is not the right call to action anyway.
Well, exactly. There's so many, like you just said, I'm the same way. I've had people give me a free copy and I'm like, I'll just buy it on Kindle because I'm like, I don't want to. And actually, I know it's really easy to move PDFs to your Kindle, but it's an extra step. But that's just a button, but yeah, there's lots of reasons why it wasn't working. One of them is it's a huge commitment. It's like, hey, if you liked this 20-minute preview, go dedicate hours of your life to more of my content. It's that's actually a really big ask. And so now what I've done, and I just tested this I was on the I Love Coaching podcast, which is great. They were doing a challenge on how to launch a one-on-one coaching business. And then it worked out perfectly. where I was like, hey, it'd be great is to have like a bonus episode on how to do group coaching. And they were like, we love that. And so I came on. It was the first show I got to talk about the book. And then they were like, okay, everybody, obviously we should get the book. But if you just got a preview of this and now you're interested in, how do you know what's the next step if you want to do group coaching? And so I got to test the call to action and say like, well, the next step is if you're wondering, because I had to get in their headspace. I'm like, okay, at the end of a podcast episode like that, you might just be wondering,
yes,
should I do group coaching? Is group coaching right for me? Like, I'm not going to assume you're already convinced. And so I just said, hey, if you're wondering if if group coaching makes sense for you, having a sold out group coaching program, and if you're wondering if you have what it takes to really become a sold out coach and to earn $10,000 or more per month, group coach 90 minutes per week, I created a 5-question quiz. Just go to soldoutquiz.com, answer these 5 questions. You'll immediately get a green, yellow, or red score on are you ready or not? And if not, what needs to happen for you to get ready? And I shared that, and instantly you could just like feel it. Like the hosts were like, that's so useful and helpful. People started taking the quiz as soon as the podcast came out. And that quiz is a much more direct call to action. Like if you are ready, where it's like, amazing. Also, we should probably help you. It's a really great natural connection to my offer. So I think that's the call to action I should use every time is the sold out quiz. What do you think?
I 100% agree. And okay. I think there's a couple kind of key principles at play here. A lot of times when we're talking about podcast guesting strategy, it's not around a book, right? And so there are principles that exist in this moment that apply whether we're talking about a book, a coaching program, or anything else. And a couple of key ones, the one that you hit on really strongly there is consumption, right? This call to action, or what we would call a lead magnet, is a bridge from interest, like attention, trust. Like they do trust you to some extent. They've heard you on an interview, you've piqued their interest, you've given them some real curiosity, and they are asking this question, I wonder if this would work for me, right? But if the only thing they can do to answer that question is go read a whole book in the form and find it and put it in the format that they prefer, you're going to miss and lose most people in that journey, because the consumption tax is so high. It's so hard to get that value. And, most people, as you know, John, I don't know the stat, maybe you do, even if they buy the book, most people don't read it, right? And so we have all of these like obstacles in the way of, man, I'm really interested. I like John. I heard him teach these principles. Man, group coaching sounds really interesting to me. And then we lose all that momentum by saying the only next step you can take is to go buy the book. Because the reality is, the book buyers in that audience are going to go buy the book anyway, right? We don't need to tell people and waste this opportunity to say, oh, guess what? My book's on Amazon. Well, no crap. Every book's on Amazon, right? Like, if I want the book, I'll go find the book. But like, we need to capture the 80% of people who are not there yet. And so you don't want to make it unconsumable. You want to create immediate value that starts to not only grow the belief in you, which they've got a heavy dose of by hearing a whole interview, but belief in themselves. I think that's the big X factor here that we don't think about enough with our call to action is, what bite-sized piece of value or prescription can I give this listener so they start to believe for themselves that this is the right path? And so there can be different forms of this for sure. I mean, it could be a worksheet, a checklist. It could be sort of pulling out the really hooky chapter. I wouldn't call it like a free chapter for my book, but you could pull out a section of the book to give them that microdose of belief and progress and like a mini transformation. But form and function wise, I think the best thing is exactly what you're planning, which is a quiz, a lightweight quiz, not like this big deep dive 20-minute assessment, but like 5 simple questions, so that if you're curious about this and you are starting to want to pursue this deeper, find out if it might work for you and make it personal to them and make it feel like diagnostic to their own situation. And it takes less than 5 minutes. It's very memorable. They can do it from their phone while they're walking the dog or working out or whatever they're doing in that moment. And so I think from the serving the listener and bridging them over into a deeper experience, that those are some of the big factors for why that's a really key call to action. And I think from your perspective, John, the reason the quiz works so well is you get to capture interest from people that haven't yet committed to buying the whole book, right? Because if you say, go get the book on Amazon, well, for one, if they buy it on Amazon, you never know it anyway. But even if they bought it from your website and you're able to capture that, we're getting maybe 5% of people to do that. In this case, you're getting a much larger percentage who are curious. They want to take the next step. They're not fully committed to reading a whole book and committing to this. And then you can follow up with them to encourage them to actually get the book and take the next steps in our funnel, right? So I know I shared a lot there, sort of like zooming out into
I love it.
What's a call to action for, and how does it serve both the person taking the action, but also you as the business owner who's prescribing the action. So anything in there you want to react to before we kind of move on from this point?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I love it. I love the way you kind of broke that down of why it works, and it makes sense. That it's obvious in hindsight, even though it's the last 3 books did not have a call to action that's clear. Yeah, so I'm excited about it. And honestly, I think even if somebody's listening to this and they say, well, yeah, my goal is to sell books, I actually still think this is a smarter path, is to go straight into a lead magnet first, like the Sold Out quiz.
Yep.
Is because what I'm doing right now is when somebody takes the quiz, if they're almost ready, like they're not ready yet, they get a yellow light, they get this kind of AI generated advice that tells them, hey, here's what you need to do next to get sold out. Most of it does change based on your scores. But the 5th thing on the list is always go read Sold Out Coach with a link to then go buy the book. So now I've got their email address, right? And now I'm sending them to go buy the book. They're far more likely to now buy the book once they're like sitting in front of their computer or on their phone, filling out the quiz and getting the results. And also I already have their email address before they even read the book. So there's so many reasons why it's a superior lead magnet to all the other alternatives that I've tried in the past. But so I'm excited about that. Okay, cool. So I've got my lead magnet now. Where do I take it, Dustin? What do I do next?
Yeah. So if you didn't see the video, the results page from John's quiz is the results of the quiz. And then right on the same page is the 1-click button to go buy the book. So we're not losing the ability for people to buy the book. We're just providing a bridge for all the people who aren't quite ready to take the full step to the book. And then I'm sure, from that page, there are people that are like, actually, I don't care about the book. I'm just going to book a call with my team and learn about this program because I'm not really a book person, but I really do want to do group coaching. So we're capturing as much possible interest and goodwill from an interview with this approach to the call to action. So that's the call to action, which is, I would say, the second most important thing after establishing the actual goals for the book and the jobs to be done for the book, which we spend a lot of time on. So we kind of move back from there into a podcast interview itself. We need to think about what people need to believe from the interview in order to take that call to action we just talked about, right? And so when you think about specific to Sold Out Coach, John, maybe 3 to 5 key problems or key topics that you want to be known for, what are they, right? Like what do people need to believe after they hear you in an interview in order to want to go take that quiz and ultimately buy the book and buy coaching? Because this is now, once we establish this, that's going to start telling us who should we be talking to and how do we get access to those audiences. But I like to really think about the stories and the teaching that you want to do in the interview so that we can frame now from this, like moving back to the very beginning in reverse order, if that's not obvious to people how we're doing this. So what are the 3 to 5 problems or topics that you want to be known for specific to this book?
Yeah, I think it probably depends on who I'm talking to. People like friends and peers assume, they're like, oh, you just help one-on-one coaches. And so you help one-on-one coaches with a group. And I'm like, well, that's kind of low-hanging fruit, right? Like, sure. Like, yes. So I do have like a section at the very beginning of the book that explains why group coaching is better than one-on-one coaching. And it's not just because it's more efficient. Like, there's a lot of reasons why it's actually better for the customer too. So I do think that's one. Like, group coaching is actually better than one-on-one coaching. I think that's a belief that I'd love to share with some audiences. But again, I feel like that's low-hanging fruit. I actually think one of my other beliefs that I'd love to teach is that group coaching is your highest ROI opportunity from your email list. I mean, Dustin, you're living proof of this, right? Yeah. I mean, you built a business doing over $1 billion a year in revenue with a tiny little email list, and it's like, and the people with a huge email list, by the way, I coach the people with huge email lists that don't have huge revenue, and they would much rather have your situation, Dustin. so that's like, I think that's something where it's like, hey, basically anybody who's trying to build an audience and make money from it should know this is the highest ROI opportunity, right?
Yep.
Like value per subscriber or per client. So I think that's an opportunity. I think also there's this other opportunity I haven't really fully tapped into, but I shared this when I talked about my core mission of like of stewarding wisdom, is that I do think there's a lot of people who have decades of experience in their field who are thinking about legacy. And sometimes they start these sort of like vanity personal brands where they're like, oh, it doesn't have to make money. I just need to like share my message with my advice with the world. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I'd love for them to know that free advice doesn't leave lasting impact. Which is it just doesn't, right? Like and so I'd love for them to know that you need to charge a premium if you want people to pay attention. That's a few things that come to mind. I'm sure there's more, but what do you think about those?
I love those. And probably obvious to you, John, as we're going through this, and the kind of the worldview I'm bringing to it, but to the listener, as John was expressing these major beliefs that need to be built for different audiences, they immediately start translating into buckets of audience, right? So
right.
There is a core message of one-on-one coaching. It has limitations, and that group coaching is better. So there's like this whole pool of podcasts that focus on people who already do coaching, but you're there to build the belief that actually group coaching is the way to actually scale, grow your impact, have more leverage in the world. Like, that's a bucket of listeners now. And then that second problem, which I really like, is how do you maximize the ROI from your email list, right? So you can start to think of all these creators and all these people who know to build email lists. They're great newsletter creators. They're great maybe YouTubers or social media experts, and they've built big email lists, but they actually have very poor monetization strategies, right? So you coming on around the topic of Sold Out Coach to talk about why sold out coaching programs are the best way to maximize the growth and leverage of your email list. That, like, there's a whole pool of podcasts now who would love to hear that specific message. And then this third one, which I know is less fully baked, but I think really relevant, there are podcasts who cater to these more seasoned, senior, sort of second career, the fourth quarter of life sort of folk who have so much wisdom to share. And they have this false premise that they need to give it all away for free to leave a legacy. And you have this very strong stance to say, no, that's actually a disservice. What you need to do is charge a premium for your wisdom and knowledge so that you can have a real impact in the world. And so that's another now bucket of podcast opportunity where that's the core message. Now, in any of these interviews, you're still going to talk about the framework from the book. You're still going to probably talk about the steps. You're going to talk about your own story and why Sold Out Coaching has been transformative to you and your clients. But the hook and the thing that you're going to go to that host and say, this is what I know about your audience, and this is why they need my message inside this book, it makes it so much more coming from a place of service. Because I think an important thing to say out loud here is, yes, the book opens doors. I am personally not a fan of your podcast pitches saying, I'm John, I wrote a book, you should interview me about the book. It should instead be, I'm John, I see your audience has this problem. I am uniquely qualified to come on and help them solve this problem. And by the way, I have authority on this because I just wrote the book on it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And the book is important, but it's not like the thing we lead with, because what we want to do is lead with the problem of the audience and how we're going to solve it in an interview. And then that solves all these downstream things that we've been talking about. So how does that feel to you in terms of what we would call plan in our step, which is identifying the pools or ponds of podcast opportunities that we want to focus on in our strategy?
I mean, it sounds really exciting, honestly, because I'm like, that's kind of the pools or ponds are multiplying in my head already as you're talking. I'm like, wait, wow, there's a lot of audiences I haven't even thought about. Because specifically that last one I mentioned, which is the least developed, a lot of times I coach people who sort of think that building an online business, like, they have to be like a 17-year-old TikTok influencer and like post on like reels 3 times a day. And it's like, no, like, if you're a 17-year-old and you've got all the time in the world, sure, do that. But for someone who doesn't, like, it's like, if you've got the time, if the things competing for your attention are like, I mean, I literally met with 2 people last month who each earn over $1 million a year from their wealth, like brokerage firms that they've run for over a decade, both of them. It was like, they don't even know each other. It was just like, I was like, whoa. I was like, so that, like, for them, again, it's actually not about the $10,000. It's about the impact. Yes. But it's also the fact that they're like, I want to build an online business, so I guess I need to post on LinkedIn 3 times a day. And I'm like, no. They're like, it's like, you don't. That is the wrong focus for someone in that position with all that wisdom. This is good. And actually, I was on, not even with this strategy, it was not even really about the book, but I was on the Online Course Show podcast recently, and I've gotten several clients from that. And I think part of that was because it's a podcast that's very specifically about how to sell online courses. And then he brought me on to say, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't sell online courses. Maybe you should sell a group coaching program. And people reached out and they were like, that was exactly what I needed to hear. It seems like online courses are dying. What do I do? So I feel like that's maybe under the same opportunity of like highest ROI per email subscriber, but it's also in the realm of just like, if you want to build your online business, this is the way.
Yes, a different model for creators, right?
Yeah.
And that's a different monetization model for creators, which is very timely because obviously the landscape shifted with AI and all the things.
Oh, yeah.
And so whether that's online course creators or email lists or people who have big social media followings who don't know how to monetize that, all of those are kind of in that second bucket where the podcast primarily talks about those things like how to build an online course or how to grow your email list or how to build a big YouTube channel. And you come on as a shoulder topic that's really complementary to that to say, hey, here's an idea for the same audience that you don't really cover much. I'm going to fill this content gap for your audience around using group coaching as the model for leveraging the attention that they already have. Yeah. So
Love it.
awesome. So that, again, we're not going to get into writing the pitch and all that, but hopefully what you hear, John, and what the listeners hear is once you begin with the end in mind and then think about that call to action and what you want people to do at the end of the interview, then it's much easier to think about what beliefs need built to make people want to do that. And when you think about the different main beliefs that need to be built, they line up, of course, with the content of your book already. That quickly identifies the pools of attention that you want to deliver that message into, right? Because those are the people sitting there basically waiting for that message. And so kind of taking it back to the beginning, when you go to look for those opportunities and then reach out to those hosts, again, you're not coming with hat in hand saying, I'm launching a book. You're number 49 out of 50. I really need this box to be checked. Like maybe a traditional book publisher launch might view it. It's like, no, I'm here to serve your audience. I have a really unique perspective, and I have this book I just wrote on this that I can pull some really key wisdom for your audience, and I'm also going to give them free value at the end in the form of this call to action, so they can go feel like this was a really good use of their time, and it's going to reflect really well on you as the host. And as John well knows, because I say it so much in our community, the whole idea here is creating a win-win-win partnership with this host, right? So it's a win for John because he's getting in front of his ideal clients and readers and people to opt into his call to action and buy his book. But it's a win for the host because it's a win for their audience, right? And so we look at that audience first and we say, man, how could I really serve this audience uniquely, and what perspective can I bring? That's why we get such high acceptance rates on the podcast that we target, because we're very intentional about why we want to target them, who we want to access, and the unique value that we're going to provide them. So that is sort of that's the strategy in the sense of what is podcast guesting doing in this. And so I think as we close out here, John, it might be helpful to just put some numbers, like how many podcasts, when, sort of what would be the mix of types of opportunities that these podcasts represent, right? So what I would say is taking this view that we open with about, we're not trying to just do 100 podcasts in 1 week to try to hit this big blip on a graph. We really want to, energize the launch. The launch is important. We want to have some initial momentum, right? So that we can get some seed readers and get reviews rolling and all the things that does. But we really want to take a longer view. I would say 2 years, but for the purposes of some simple numbers, let's just talk about 1 year. So we say, hey, I wrote this book. It's going to launch on X date. I got this window to work with a lot of intention. So in the first year, when I released this book, what would be some very reasonable and effective volume, I guess you could say, right? And what I would say to that is 50, right? I'm just going to put out a number. Okay. Now, of course, anyone could triple that, or 50 in the first year. And so the reason I like to use 50 is it's one a week. It's very approachable.
You're assuming I take some time off. That's good. That's generous.
Yeah, you get 2 weeks off a year, John. I'm going to give you Christmas with your family.
Although I think I'm doing 4 podcasts this week, so maybe I'll buy some more vacation time.
Well, and that actually gets to my next point. In a non-launch version of this, like what we do with our clients, we're typically saying literally one a week. So when people go through our accelerator program, our intent is let's get you on 1 podcast a week, because that unlocks sort of this math towards a 6-figure return on your time. But when it is a launch based, in this case, book launch, we do want to be mindful about the concentration of those 50, right? But not to the extent that we're doing 50 at the week of the book launches and nothing else, because that's I think a mistake that people make. So the way I like to think about this is roughly, these are all general numbers, but I'd say like 10 in sort of the pre-launch time, which you're in now, 10 the week of the launch. We do want to give some concentrated effort in the first month of this book being out in the wild. So 10 before, 10 during the launch, effectively those couple weeks when you're really getting out and talking about it a lot. And then I would say like 30 post-launch, right? Which is not as intense as it is during the launch period, but we're also not putting all of our effort and eggs into one concentrated window. So how does that feel? Enough, too much, sort of like reasonable as far as just like a concentration of effort?
Yeah, I kind of like penciled in a goal of like, I was like, 25 stages this quarter, the book's coming out like, July 21st. And so then I was thinking, okay, July 21st, that's like not, it's like into the quarter, but it's not like far enough into the quarter that you still got some time to do some stuff. So that's kind of what I was thinking. It sounds like that's pretty close to what you're recommending, because if we combine the after launch and the pre-launch, so even if I did 20, that'd be good. That's encouraging. I think it's doable. It's going to take focus because I'm not as consistent normally on podcasts. Unfortunately, I'm like a fair weather podcaster. Like I go into seasons where I'm like pitching a few podcasts, and seasons where, like right now, I just got invited to the Smart Passive Income podcast, and I owe them an email to get on it, and it's a huge podcast. And I'm like, they're like waiting on me to get back to them. Whoops. I need to go do that.
Well, I think that speaks also to what will be true for many of our listeners, is definitely true for you and for is we have relationships. And a lot of times we have these sort of dormant relationships that we just need to stir up a little bit because we have a reason to do so, right? So again, that's different than saying, I'm only going to do podcasts for 1 week. I'm going to do 100 of them in 1 week because that's my launch week. But, in service of the goals you have for this book, I think thinking in a healthy way, like, okay, 50, if I could do like 10 to 20 pre-launch, launch kind of in that opening quarter, and then I'm able to spread that effort out beyond that. It's not like most people have to start from scratch and say, I don't know anyone, I got to find 50. Most of us, especially if you're at the point where you're writing an authority-based book, you have clients, you have relationships, you have peers, you're in other communities and groups. And this gives you, as much as them, it gives you the reason to make this a concentrated effort, put a plan behind it, and execute, right? So it's fine that maybe you go a year without doing any of these proactively, but now you are going to do it proactively because there's a goal line that you're working against. So I think if we say 50 and it's sort of spread out over the year in that way, the other thing I'd like to talk about a little bit, again, inexact science here, the sort of the composition of those 50. I think that's important too. I think a lot of people would think, well, any 50 will do. Well, no, like we want to think about, this is sort of a matrix, right? We want to think about topically, maybe you want to do 10 on legacy, 20 on increasing ROI from existing creators, and whatever the balance is, 20 on group coaching instead of one-on-one. That starts to give you some more tangible sort of targets within the 50. But then kind of vertically, we want to think about, not all podcast appearances are put on your plan sheet because of the audience directly, right? And so I guess to elaborate on that, most of them will be, they have an audience that needs to hear my message. But some will be very strategically selected. It's actually like that host will be a great partner for me. They have a community that I would love to have deeper access to. So yeah, their audience is good, but the main reason I actually want to solidify a podcast appearance is to get to know the host better, build rapport and authority with them, because I want to be on their conference stage this fall, right? So there's that. So kind of the list I have. It's like,
I thought about that stuff. I need to.
Aligned audiences is probably, going to be the majority of this, but aligned strategic partners, I would say, would be a strong number 2 when you're thinking about podcasts within each of your pools or ponds. Some of these would be pure authority building shows. Like, I would love to be able to, in version 2 of this book, to put that was featured on X podcast, even if like maybe the audience isn't the most aligned from a book buying standpoint. There's certain shows that's just like, it would mean a lot to me from a credibility and authority building standpoint to be on this show. And while I'm in this window of opportunity, this would be a great time to execute on that. And then the last one I would say would be the what I call the unicorns, right? Like, if there was ever a time for me to get on smart passive income, right, it would be now, while I have this I have this momentum built. I have this very real reason to reach out at this time, not only for them to receive it, but for you to give that invitation, right? And so you think about listening audiences, strategic partners in the form of hosts and other guests that have been on these shows, some that are just purely for credibility building reasons. And then, you're probably going to have 1 to 5 out of 50 that are sort of the grand slams, the unicorns. Is like, I probably wouldn't usually try to get on Amy Porterfield or Pat Flynn or Lewis Howes or whatever that is. But like, now's the time to take my shot, because I am in this period of focused concentration on getting this book out. And many of those larger shows actually are much more receptive when you do have a book. And some of them do actually like to support, book launches, and they like to feature a lot of new authors during that time. So that's how I think about the 50 and trying to break that down into different buckets so that it feels much more manageable, so that you're like, well, here's these 5 are ROI podcast because of the listening audience. These 5 are just partnerships and community leaders and conference organizers and things that I really want to be in front of. And it makes that 50 a lot less vague, right? It gives you a lot more direction about how you're going to actually break down the strategy and to make it much more approachable for you.
That's great. Thank you, Dustin. I'm like inspired to do this. I think I've been so focused on writing and editing the book. I mean, like, I've known this with every other book, but it's like, I always think that like I'm at the finish line. It's like, oh no, I'm at the starting line. I remember now, but it's good. This is a good starting line, because I was just thinking about how, as you're sharing this, I'm like, okay, the book just becomes really my primary marketing angle for my whole business for the next year. I mean, it's like, there's no reason for it not to be, because if all roads start at the book but lead to the quiz, lead to the, like, that's a really good business model. And so I'm excited about that, because I think we don't really have to unpack it here, but I also think like there's another untapped opportunity probably we're circling back to at some point, which is the fact that now that I have a mastermind group where I'm also a publisher, right? Then the book itself is already brought in one new Authority Guild member where they were like, what do you do with your book launch? And it led to me like sharing more behind the scenes stuff and them joining the mastermind and becoming a publishing client. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I assumed that the Authority Guild was just for alumni of Sold Out Coach Club, but actually there's this other way for people to join now that I haven't really explored yet. So I right now the focus is sell the book. That's going to lead to Sold Out Coach Club. So the Sold Out Coach book will lead to Sold Out Coach Club via the Sold Out quiz. But I think that there's probably a bigger picture, and maybe this is just like a second lap of coming back around and going like, hey, look how I use this book to build this massive business success, right? And then it's like it becomes the case study that helps also grow the publishing company too.
1,000%. Yeah. And what I was going to close with for you and for the listeners is, plans are plans. We do want to have a plan, and we want to, in this instance, what are the first 10, the next 10 around the launch? What are those 30? What are these key topics, which identify the pools? So we can have a pretty dialed in plan with specific podcasts that we want to reach. And you don't have to do it all on day one. And there was a natural momentum that gets built because of the core strategy behind this, which is we are looking to have a sustainable, multifaceted strategy behind marketing our book with podcast guesting. We're not putting all of the effort into 1 week where you either feel like this really worked or it's a complete failure and it was a waste of time, right? And one of the reasons that you just kind of started to allude to it is, as you do this, what happens is you get micro wins for yourself and you build momentum, right? It's like, oh, that second podcast I was on, I got a client. It was worth $10,000. Well, guess what? You're gonna be much more excited about pitching the next one, right? Or, wow, I hadn't really thought about it, but as I got into this in the 8th podcast, I realized that this is actually a great way. This can become a great case study for my mastermind. And that gives you a lot more intrinsic motivation. So you don't have to do it all at once, but it is good to begin with the end in mind and then have a simple but attainable plan. And just realize that as you embark on the plan and you start putting in some of the early reps, that will those early wins will beget the next wins and the next wins. And all of a sudden you're going to wake up a year from now, look back and be like, wow, I actually did 50 podcasts and I would have never guessed, but this happened and this happened. And look at all these cool things. None of that can happen without starting, and none of that can happen without a good strategy behind it. But what I hope people hear is we're talking about a whole year of effort in, one hour podcast here. And the reality is you're going to be able to meter out your energy and adjust this plan as you go, because you're going to get real-time feedback in the process of doing it. And I hope that's a big encouragement to you, John, and to anyone else listening, thinking about how they're going to launch a book using podcasts.
That's so useful. Thank you, Dustin. I appreciate you sharing that. I think this is the part where I say, if you found this useful, then go buy the book wherever books are sold, right?
Two things real quick. So one, okay. Any just like immediate things that jump out at you as sort of your useful takeaways from our conversation. And then absolutely, I want to transition into letting you practice your CTA here for our listeners.
Yes, thank you. There's so much. Let me think real quick. Let me distill it down to my most useful takeaway. I think my most useful takeaway is honestly, like, talking through the pools of people that it's useful for, like, and how. Okay, no, here's what it is. It's the idea that there's a different version of the pitch for the book to different audiences. That seems obvious in hindsight, but in my head, I was already drafting like the one pitch, and then I was just going to like shop that around, like who wants it. And talking it through the way you did, it's like, what are these different scenarios? What are the things the messages you want to get across? And then realizing, actually, probably it's a different one pager for different audiences. Like maybe it's not all customized, and maybe there's 3 to 5 different versions of that. And so I need to think hard about that. And I don't need to think hard about it. I need to create that. So that's my biggest takeaway for sure. There's a lot useful, but that was definitely my biggest takeaway.
Good. And one thing I'll add on to that real quick is, because you're so specific in the serve that you're going to give to each of these audiences, what will naturally happen is you might have to write 1 to 3 pitches to kind of get that ball rolling into that focus area. But then at the end of that first interview, when you say, you're a online course creator, topic, who else do you know in your mastermind sphere of influence, previous guests who would really get a lot of value to have me on their podcast to talk about this for their creator audience? And you're going to immediately get 3 to 5 referrals for other podcasts. Our whole goal is, of course, to start the momentum by taking that action, writing that outreach. But I'm predicting that within 30 days or so, John, these are going to become inbound in a sense, or they're going to be all referral based, where you actually don't have to do a lot of outreach. They're going to come to you through referrals and through your own visibility in the marketplace, where people are like, I got to have John on my show to talk about this, because the thing he said about online course creators totally applies to my email newsletter podcast, right? So again, as a encouragement to everyone, we're not talking about 50 cold outreaches here. We're talking about seeding this very strategically and intentionally. And because we're so specific with that, momentum will carry on from there. So John, the good news is, in our audience, there are lots of creators and authorities and one-on-one coaches and people leaving a legacy. A lot of your ideal clients are here. So what would be your advice or your next step for people who do want to learn more about Sold Out Coach, your book, and all the things available to them with your methodology?
Go buy the book wherever books are sold. Right?
Probably on Amazon.
Sorry. No, I messed it up. No, so if you're curious about the book, if you're curious about the idea of earning $10,000 per month, group coaching 90 minutes per week, then I would encourage you to go to soldoutquiz.com. Answer 5 quick questions in 60 seconds to get an instant report on whether or not you have what it takes to be a sold out coach, and unlock a bonus Sold Out Coach crash course. I didn't even tell you about this. It includes a bonus Sold Out Coach crash course that actually gives you the I would call it Cliff Notes, but I think that's trademarked. So the Meese Notes version of the book. How about that?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Soldoutquiz.com. If you're heard this interview and you're curious about Sold Out Coach and how group coaching might serve you and your goals, go take the quiz and take that magical next step. And yeah, man, I think we got a killer strategy here. I hope this is really useful for everyone kind of eavesdropping on our conversation. And I'm really grateful to be alongside you in your book launch. And then, I'll be doing this for myself here in the coming months with your guidance.
I'm excited. Thank you, Dustin. Keep up the good work.